There are three types of spell components in D&D 5th edition. First, you have verbal components, which the rules describe as the chanting of mystic words. You know, you've got your bippity-boppity-boo, your alakadabra, your ricola, your avada kedavra. Then there's somatic components, which the rules describe as a forceful gesticulation or an intricate set of gestures. In other words, you're either casting a spell or you just walked into a spider web. Ha! Exactly like that. And finally, we have the material components, which are the actual things you need to cast the spell. They're like ingredients, but instead of baking a cake with eggs, flour, and sugar, you're making a ball of fire with bat poop and sulfur. That's actually true, by the way. And that's why you can call fireball-wielding murder hobos batshit crazy. Bad jokes aside, why am I telling you this? Why are you here? Well, it's because spell components are possibly the most slept on mechanic in all of D&D 5th edition. And by the end of this video, you will not only understand spell components, if you don't already, but you will also have a slew of ways to use them to enrich your campaigns, drive the plot forward, and to make your characters feel like spell-slinging badasses, but in surprising ways. And stay tuned until the end for the homebrew mechanic that I call the Final Stand Contingency. I love coming up with cool names. So now's a good time to pause the video and comment your current stance on spell components. Do you use them? Do you know nothing about them? There's no wrong answer, but you can compare what you comment now to how you feel at the end of the video. But let me start by admitting something. Of all the spells in D&D, the one that I've wanted the most in real life is the sleep spell. If there's too much ambient light, if it's too warm, I'm just tossing and turning, and I really can't have an adequate long rest. But thanks to today's sponsor, Manta Sleep, I can effectively cast the sleep spell on myself at will every night. And that's because of the Manta sleep mask. Compared to other sleep masks that I've tried, these are extremely soft, very easily adjustable, and have these modular eye cups that don't actually touch your eyelids, which is a must for me. Specifically, I have their cool eye cups, which you can actually put in the freezer before you go to bed. So you can drift to sleep in this cool, chilled darkness. It's actually very soothing. Manta Sleep is linked in the description, and you can get 10% off your order using code DMTHINGS at checkout. So go check them out to prepare your own sleep spell, and thank you to Manta Sleep for sponsoring today's video. Before we get into the juicy stuff, let's get on the same page about the actual mechanics of spell components. Starting once again with bat poop. To cast the spell Fireball, you need a tiny ball of bat guano and a bit of sulfur. To cast the Alarm spell, on the other hand, you need a tiny bell and a bit of fine silver wire. So in other words, just for those two spells, you already need 4 different material components. And in a vacuum, this seems like a complete pain in the ass. But thankfully, the player handbook addresses this problem with 2 mechanically equivalent items: the spell component pouch and the arcane focus. The spell component pouch contains all the components you might need for most spells already in it. And the arcane focus just replaces the need for most material spell slots in the first place. Both of these items have their own exciting implications that we'll talk about shortly, but they also have their limits, because they can only replace material components that don't have a listed value. Meaning, if a spell's components list a gold value, you need those actual specific components on hand. For example, the Identify spell requires a pearl worth 100 gold pieces, so you actually need that pearl. But it does not get consumed, so you can use it over and over if you want. But you also have spells like Find Familiar, which require 10 gold pieces worth of charcoal, incense, and herbs, but specifies that the components are consumed upon use. To summarize, material components are basically on this balancing spectrum. You have spells that don't require any components. You have spells that require components but are effectively covered by the spell component pouch or the arcane focus because there's no listed value. Spells that require specific components with a listed value that can be reused, and then those that require specific components that are consumed upon use. On paper, this system exists to add an additional balancing factor beyond spell slots. That's why insanely powerful spells like True Resurrection require 25,000 gold pieces worth of diamonds. But then, of course, beyond material components, you also have these somatic and verbal components that I talked about before. These are much less involved than material components are. Essentially, if you can speak aloud and move your arms, you're good. But now that we're on the same page, how do you use this? Well, let's start with some simple examples and then work our way to something a bit more extreme. First is simply character aesthetic and roleplay. The way that your spellcasters go about casting spells can and should be a big part of how that character visually presents. Do they have a big pouch of spell components on their hip? Do they have the components themselves hanging all about them, kind of Radagast style? Do they have a unique or significant arcane focus? If so, what is it and what does it look like? These are all great questions for session 0 and can go a long way for helping players flesh out their character in unexpected ways. But then you also have what I call the Todd Howard approach.
Let me see your face. You are the one from my dreams.
I've did a whole video on this before in the context of D&D, but if you didn't know, basically every modern Elder Scrolls game starts you as some kind of prisoner or in a prison. Being a prisoner, as you may now realize, has all kinds of implications for spellcasters. If you're a prisoner, you're not going to have your material component pouch or your arcane focus. You will only be able to cast spells that don't require any material components. This might sound like a limitation at first glance, but in fact it gives a lot more weight and satisfaction to every step towards freedom and to regaining their special magical powers. For example, they may be a prisoner at the top of a tower, and they might know the spell Featherfall, which fittingly requires the material component of a feather. So in order to safely jump off the tower in an effort to escape, they need to acquire a feather. Maybe they entice a bird to land on the windowsill and they pluck a feather off of it. Or they somehow convince a guard that they really need a down pillow because they have a bad back or something. I don't know. But even as they escape and have to go through the process of rebuilding their magical arsenal, there's now an actual in-game story behind each component, which makes casting those spells and using those items that much more special. Now, the game is called Dungeons and Dragons. So how would you use this in a dungeon? Well, put quite simply, spell components make excellent dungeon loot, especially rare ones that are hard to come by. This makes a lot of sense, especially for enemy spellcasters, where you loot spell components off their body. And bonus points for immersion if you have that spellcaster while fighting the party. Cast the spells that those components are used for. You can't beat it. Spell components can make an extremely viable non-death consequence. Let me explain. Let's say that a player, I don't know, goofs a god, is blown off a tower and falls to their near death. One of the lasting consequences of that could be a shattered spell focus that they now have to replace. Also sound off in the comments if you know what I was referencing. But more broadly, there could be narrative reasons that a party might want to seek out a specific spell component that they don't have. They might need to cast the Identify spell to learn something about an important artifact, or cast the Scrying spell to spy on the big bad. You can use the need for these spell components to guide the party into interesting plot developments. Maybe they have to travel to the coast to find a pearl for the Identify spell. Or even better, they have to perform a heist at an arcane university to find the special focus that they need to cast the Scrying spell. And while on the heist, maybe they run into another NPC who's doing the same thing, maybe for the same reason. And so now they have an important ally that they needed to meet anyway. Or a rival. I don't know. It's your campaign. Obviously, the sky is the limit. And before we get into this last idea that bends the rules a bit, remember this. Whatever you apply to your players may also now apply to you and your NPCs. Are they preparing to, I don't know, fight the Archmage of the High King? Well, now the rogue is going to break into the Archmage's quarters and steal his spell focus, or dump out his spell component pouch and replace everything in it with bat poop. Wait, you get the idea. All of the above affect your players, but they're not just obstacles. They're tools for them to use in creative ways. And now for the final stand contingency that I referenced at the beginning of the video. Let's say that the party finds themselves in a desperate situation. They gravely need to be able to cast teleportation to escape, but their spellcaster is out of spell slots. As a last-ditch effort, the spellcaster decides to overload their arcane focus, or burn through all of their remaining spell components, just to generate the arcana needed to cast that one spell. And it might succeed, but the cost is their entire spell focus, or their entire component pouch, or maybe even all of the components that they've collected. You can balance this further by adding an arcana check or exhaustion levels. Of course, make it fit your table and your situation. But all of the above are just general examples to make a case for using every bit of the rules surrounding spellcasting components. And I didn't even get into the implications of somatic and verbal components on stealth missions, for example. As with any video like this, it is far from comprehensive, so please feel free to give your own thoughts, ideas, suggestions, criticisms, all of the above in the comment section below. That'll help make the comment section itself a resource for this topic. Thank you for watching and have an excellent, excellent day.